Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I want to talk about gay men and wealth, how to cope with its rewards and challenges. So, in my experience, you know me, I like to say, how long? 32 years in 2024 as a gay men specialist psychotherapist in California and a gay men specialist life, career, executive, and relationship coach worldwide, and as a certified sex therapist, I've enjoyed a great diversity even within my specific niche of gay men. And I've noticed over the years, though, that in addition to working with gay men as individuals and couples and polycules, I've developed an expertise even more specifically in working with affluent gay men who have often had a considerable amount of wealth from all over the country in the United States and in the world. It's just kind of worked out that way. And most of the time, we're working on goals that are about gay men's mental health and well-being, personally and professionally, and specific problems that come up in our lives. Occasionally, I help gay men who have achieved wealth but need some kind of support around this. Obviously, let's get that out of the way, that it's a nice problem to have, right? And it can be dismissed easily as, first world problems. But despite what they're called, they can still be problems, nice or first world or not. And it's important in the midst of our daily grind and rat race to take a step back and just allow ourselves to reflect on where we are with things. There are so many Western pressures to accumulate wealth, even at lower socioeconomic levels in various countries. In most capitalist democracies, and even in non-democracy countries, there can be a near constant financial considerations to do more at every phase of life. It's as if accumulating wealth is the object of the game in life, like we're all just playing one big round of Monopoly, the board game that was invented during the Great Depression as a send-up of class divides. But when we consider issues around wealth, we find unique issues for gay men. Gay men can be especially tuned to how wealth translates into a sign of self-worth, familial worth, and societal worth, when we as gay men are a population that is regularly devalued. It's theorized that wealth among gay men, and maybe some other social outgroups, underserved, discriminated against groups, that this serves as perhaps an unconscious psychological defense against societal devaluation. Other populations, such as blacks and Jews, have been associated with this phenomenon as depicted in songs like Cadillac Car from the Broadway musical Dreamgirls, and the lyrics that talk about the black population getting Cadillacs as a symbol of social status. Or there's a book about the history of Hollywood called An Empire of Their Own, which is about entrepreneurialism in early Hollywood after corporations on the East Coast were anti-Semitic and excluded Jews. So let's look at the rewards and the challenges for gay men in wealth and explore our understanding of how to identify and utilize supportive others as resources. I'll talk about that later on. But for now, let's look at each reward and challenge, and then I'll also offer a possible coping strategy for each one of the challenges. So first, let's take a look at the list of rewards. And the rewards of wealth, are kind of obvious. Wealth is a frequently enviable position for many the world over. It's kind of like, nice work if you can get it. The wealth of others can inspire us, or it can bother us in comparison with an us versus them mentality. But existentially, there will always be people with more wealth than us and people with less wealth than us in all populations and cultures and throughout history. It's a big deal, and it can be overwhelming. So first, let's look at some of the rewards that wealth can bring to whatever extent. Number one is security. Wealth brings security for our self-care for the long term. With some exceptions, and more all the time it seems, gay men often do not have children. And with no kids, who will take care of us in our old age? We have to have an answer for this, and wealth can help us hire people and do some of the things that adult children as parental caregivers might do, which just costs more overall. With sufficient wealth, we can be secure that our needs will be met as older people, even if we become elderly in society. With, modern medical technology, we are increasingly likely to be longer lifespans as medical technology evolves or even accelerates in the current generations. Number 2, standard of living and lifestyle. Wealth is a fuel and energy that creates situations and experiences. It allows us to fund the various elements of a vacation, the plane, the hotel, the meals, the excursions, from transportation to lodging to food to tourist experiences. Wealth gives us access to good restaurants wherever we live, or world cultural sites that have admission tickets, or cultural opportunities in the arts, like going to concerts. Concerts can be so expensive these days, like Madonna's world tour and all of that. Theater productions. Theater tickets lately have had surge pricing on many American tours, where the more people that want to see the show, the higher the ticket price goes, like an auction. Or dance events, things like a ballet company or an international dance company. These are all ticketed events that cost money to buy a ticket to. Or certainly ticketed professional sporting events. Look at how high a ticket to the Super Bowl is, or even to a football game or a baseball game. Or wealth can also allow for expensive hobbies like keeping and showing horses, or skiing in various ski resorts around the world, or being involved in aviation. All of these things are fun, but they are especially expensive hobbies or pastimes. Number 3 of how wealth can contribute to things is our domestic lifestyle. Wealth will certainly inform where you live, like the section of a city or a local neighborhood, even sometimes what street you live on, right? What kind of dwelling you live in. Is it a single-family house, or a condo, or a townhouse, or a loft, or an apartment? How it's decorated, what kind of theme and style and design of materials. What you wear, like designer clothes or not. What you drive, a fancy car versus a modest car. What you eat, what household devices that your home is equipped with. What daily conveniences that you enjoy. And even whether you hire various support staff in a home, like a housekeeper or a chef or a gardener or an assistant or a nanny or an au pair or a pool keeper. Number 4, wealth can be a reward, usually, for not having kids. Wealth when we do not have children can help us conserve funds that otherwise would have been used to provide for our children abundantly. We save money from not doing trust funds, or paying tuition for private schools, or paying for college or graduate school. We save when we don't provide children with a house down payment or medical support, or gifts for special occasions like graduation or bar mitzvahs or their marriage or their children, our grandchildren, or birthdays or anniversaries. All of those resources that would have gone toward raising children are reinvested in how the primary relationship, a couple or a polycule, lives in terms of their lifestyle. Number 5 about a reward of wealth is philanthropy. Wealth provides us the practical ability to express altruism in high magnitude ways according to your value system and the causes that you want to support. That can be LGBT rights, the environment, medical causes, funding to fight a certain disease or another, children's causes. Even if they're not your children, that could still be an interesting charity. Anything having to do with animals or the arts, architecture and historic preservation, school scholarships, other educational institution supports, like naming a building or a room in exchange for a donation, or serving as a benefactor or a mentor to someone. Carol Burnett, the great American actress, comedian, famously tells a story of an anonymous benefactor who bankrolled her early years in show business, with the only caveat was to never reveal his name. It was a man. She did reveal it was a man. And to pay it forward if she became successful. And of course she did become successful, and later she established a theater scholarship at her alma mater, and mine, by the way, at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, in Los Angeles. So nice as these rewards and maybe others are that wealth brings, it also has considerable challenges. And these are not unimportant in the deal. And these are some of the things that I help guys with fairly often if I'm working with guys who are gay men who are also on the higher income levels. So some of the challenges can include, number one, a fear of losing security. Many people, once they achieve wealth, can be haunted by an anxiety about losing it. We've all heard of the rags to riches to rags stories. Where I live in Los Angeles, entertainment professionals can be notorious for this, and they're sometimes miserly because of it. And they never really shake the anxiety that maybe they had when they were starting out as a young actor or writer or designer, about worrying about where your next gig or your next meal was coming from. And for some reason, this can be a neurosis of people who have wealth, and it can cause considerable subjective pain, especially if we define anxiety as the fear of loss, either emotional loss or material loss, or a loss of status, or being humiliated. All of this usually neurotically. Sometimes the more you have, the more intense the anxiety of loss can be, because the higher you go, the farther you have to fall, right? And it's kind of tragic not to be able to allow yourself to have and to enjoy it. So what's the coping strategy for the wealth challenge of the fear of losing security? The solution lies in cognitively reframing from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, backed up by solid financial planning advice from trusted experts, like a certified financial planner or a fiduciary, who is a type of financial planner who is legally obligated to put their clients' needs first, not just their own commissions. And we also cope by learning cognitive techniques to cope with anxiety and learn to live with the fear of loss that's a fact of life, and to talk about things that are possible but not likely. Number two of the challenges can be guilt at having what others don't in society, being called privileged and denigrated for being wealthy and more than mainstream society, or being called materialistic when gay men express that, gay men have good taste kind of phenomenon, while also being denigrated for being gay and being less than in mainstream society. So what's the coping strategy for this? We have to learn to ignore societal homophobia that manifests as rage against us. Develop your own altruistic values and charitable actions and boundaries about if and how you want to pay it forward for others. It's always your prerogative about what you will and won't do when it comes to managing your wealth. Number three is very similar, a guilt at having what others don't in your own family, like outshining or showing up your parents or some kind of sibling rivalry. So what's the coping strategy? It's really understanding that each generation, as children grow into adults, is responsible for itself, whether they achieve or accumulate more or less than the generation before, or the one before that, or the one before that. Emphasizing both the opportunity and the responsibility of everyone for themselves in a family past the formative years, taking personal responsibility for the trajectory of your life, even if that means coping with good fortune or misfortune along the way. This is something I do a lot of when I'm doing life coaching, to look at the trajectory of your life. Where are you headed based on previous decisions and maybe even current actions? And then if it doesn't look too good, we think about how can you adopt certain thoughts and actions and behaviors right now that changes the trajectory of where your career is going, where your social life is going, all of those, with the idea that self-empowerment helps us to change the trajectory of our lives. Self-empowerment is the name of my book from 2013, Self-Empowerment, Have the Life You Want, How to Close the Gap Between Where You Are and Where You Want to Be. So Self-Empowerment, Have the Life You Want is available on Lulu, Lulu.com, or on Amazon too. Shameless plug there for the book. But I do believe in that concept of self-empowerment, because when we empower ourselves, we say that we're not helpless to change the things that are not going well. We are empowered to make different choices and different thought patterns and different behaviors that will ultimately get us a different outcome. So, what's another one? Number 4 of the challenges is somehow feeling like you're betraying your culture. Maybe you come from a culture where modesty is valued, and you're very aware of the socioeconomic status or the class background of your family of origin. There might be possible immigration factors. I've worked with a lot of guys who are first-generation American after their parents have emigrated from another country, and they try to balance the culture of the United States that they're growing up in and getting accustomed to versus the culture they came from in a home country that their parents still have a strong influence on them about. It might be different implications for what wealth means in a culture, and not just practical financial ways, but what wealth means in the culture. So what's the coping strategy for this? I think it's to find ways to honor the culture that you come from without necessarily obeying any notions that poverty is noble or that wealth is immoral if it's gained by ethical means. Celebrate your culture in other ways, knowing that everyone in a culture, whatever culture that is, probably does not adhere to every tenet, and we always have to customize our understanding of whatever culture or cultures we're from, and we have to do what works for us. Number 5 is a fear of denigration by jealous others, such as, school peers or siblings or co-workers. I've had that. Critical society, their blanket statements from others about privilege, which is jealousy and rage, and demonizing whole groups, white, male, cisgender, American, even if not straight. And society at large that deeply resents affluent gay men as being sinners who are undeserving of God's abundance and they need to be punished. Much the way rich blacks have been persecuted in history, the gotta keep them down mentality as an expression of white supremacist bigotry and the tyranny of the majority. There are a number of historical incidents that are really coming to light now about how affluent black communities were burned down or just ruined by white supremacist people who didn't believe that black people in America deserve to be affluent. It caused them rage. And we have that also with homophobes who resent the wealthy gay man, or they resent the wealthy trans person or the wealthy lesbian, both the sexism and the homophobia when they're enraged at wealthy lesbians. So what is the coping strategy for this? People who are jealous of what others have are inappropriately crossing interpersonal boundaries instead of minding their own business. Like Gladys Kravitz. Remember Bewitched? Bewitched was kind of a gay icon sitcom from the 60s with lots of reruns, and Gladys Kravitz was the nosy neighbor, always poking her nose in, and it was played for comedy, but it kind of demonstrated what not to do about butting into other people's business. So With the exception of a basic tax system and insurance systems that exist in civilized society, people with less do not gain more by simply resenting or being jealous of those with more, when they should be striving for their own success in their own way, and perhaps advocating against systemic privilege issues or other unfair or imbalanced dynamics like racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, xenophobia, and just other forms of bigotry. Abundance thinking is a hallmark of robust and fair and equitable societies. But not everyone in society will have equally in any culture throughout the world and throughout history. There's natural variations that happen. Also, we need to recognize that one form of homophobia, if we look closely, is about class resentment and homophobes' frustrated need to punish us materially. The Holocaust in Europe in the 30s and 40s acted out its murderous anti-Semitism by deliberately humiliating Jewish families materially, such as confiscating precious art, or just their cash, their bank accounts, their jewelry, their clothing, all of their belongings, even the gold in their teeth, and very specifically demanding that they be robed in concentration camps in these plain rag uniforms under horrible living conditions, acting out their hatred by way of commercial conditions. Republicans desired to get rid of sexual orientation and gender legal protections as part of their long-term political and social agenda is in part to prevent LGBT people from suing for actual monetary compensation or punitive damages in legal civil rights cases. Republicans are always against what they call tort law or civil law because they don't believe that the tyranny of the majority should be confronted with legal actions, such as discrimination against minority groups. The next challenge would be anxiety about having imposter syndrome. We read a lot about imposter syndrome, on the internet, and it's not an official clinical diagnosis. It's just something that we have a name for about when people feel that they have a very profound self-doubt or they feel unworthy of the gains that they've made in terms of wealth or position or influence or prestige. So what's the coping strategy for this? I think it's cognitive therapy that explores your family of origin issues of where the self schema, which we call the list of core beliefs about yourself, were formed, in your formative years. And this can help identify how the feeling of being less than was incorporated into your total self-concept, often through a hypercritical parent, but also from bad teachers or bad coaches or bad clergy that had a lot of negative messages for you, especially for being gay or just in general. The hypercritical parents can harm the self-esteem of children who aren't even LGBT. But cognitive therapy can help us develop a professional self-esteem about how you learn and hone and express your skills in the context of a professional setting, in a vocation, and critically recognizing your contributions to your field, but also identifying areas for professional growth or business expansion through the lifespan of a career. I've done a lot of this work when I have been a clinical supervisor of young clinicians, young therapists, who are either in grad school and in clinical training programs or after grad school, but in the couple years before they sit for the state licensing exams. And it's a double-edged sword. It's supporting how a young clinician makes contributions to the field and personal growth and is building their confidence to be a good therapist. And then it's also recognizing where the deficits are. We all have them, but good clinical supervision in the training of psychotherapists will help a young clinician to identify where their weak spots are and to strengthen those so that their overall competence and skill as a clinician grows. And that's true with just about any profession. An Olympic sport would have a coach that capitalizes on their strengths, but also really coaches them about their weaknesses so that they don't have points deductions when they're competing. Or this would be true in, just about any field where a young person is new to the field, maybe just out of school, and hopefully, if they're lucky, they have some kind of mentor that can be both cheerleader and critic to help them to grow. Practicing what's called abundance thinking helps to reframe this zero-sum game of I only win if others lose to my benefit. That's not abundance thinking. That's what Louise Hay, the author, calls poverty-oriented thinking. And poverty-oriented thinking never leads to anything good. Abundance thinking is this idea that other people can achieve and they can be just fine. But I'm not as interested in that. I'm interested in how I can achieve and then how I can pay it forward based on my own efforts and my own values and my own actions. Number 7 is the pressure to support family and friends when you're achieving some wealth and feeling like you can't say no, to your parents or your siblings or children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews or friends that are undergoing some kind of misfortune and they want some kind of a handout or a loan. Now, sometimes you might do this, I think, with a discussion of what the boundaries are. Some people who are wealthy, who are trying to help a friend who is in a bad way, they might say, I won't necessarily give you cash, but I'll pay a bill for you. Or I'll pay your tuition directly to your school. Or I'll pay your rent directly to your landlord. This is how somebody might help somebody who's newly in recovery from substance abuse, let's say, without being an enabler. But the coping strategy for the pressure to support family and friends when you're wealthy is just realizing that interpersonal relationship boundaries apply to all interpersonal relationships, including to partners and spouses, and about how we spend our resources of time, energy, and money. I've had other episodes about that and lots of other writing about that, including in my book, about our resources in life that we have to work with discretionarily. Is that a word? An adverb. Of time, energy, and money. Time, energy, and money are really the building blocks of life about what we have to work with. And, energy can be about health. There can be a wealth in health if you have good energy. And, of course, time. Time has been said to be the most precious commodity of all. And, of course, money, because, you need that to live, literally. So we have both the right and the obligation to carefully decide what we can and want to do about those resources, especially money, and the prerogative to decide if and when and how much and how often we might give money to others as altruism within a family or within a community. It's always our right to allocate our personal resources of time, energy, and money according to our decisions and our values and priorities and goals, even if others disagree or criticize with our decisions. Because our time and energy and money are resources that no one else really has claim to. They're a personal resource, and we all have the adult prerogative to control our resources of time, energy, and money according to our values and priorities and goals. And the exceptions to this in a broader society would be through taxes or charities or profit sharing or Social Security or other instruments that manifest the idea that to him much is given, much is expected. Or rather, I should say, to them, much is given, much is expected. What can also be referred to as noblesse oblige in a society to achieve a broader social justice. Because we can't talk about wealth, certainly, in politics and social dynamics, without talking a little bit about social justice and what is fair and what is unfair. Lately, globally and nationally, we've seen a lot of what is unfair, where wealth is not informed by social justice. And that becomes a problem in society that society collectively is going to have to deal with. It's not easy. Number 8 is administrative headaches when you're wealthy. Again, okay, nice problem to have. But I've known a lot of people who are wealthy that deal with complicated taxes, way more complicated than people who don't earn very much. Philanthropy administration. My husband works in philanthropy, raising money for college scholarships at a school that he works at. And the details of how you work through almost the paperwork of a philanthropic gift gets very complicated because the charity has rules, and then the donor might have preferences, and they have to negotiate that, and it takes time. Investment anxiety, do you allocate more to stocks or bonds or real estate or commodities or bank accounts, Bitcoin, and anxiety of how to allocate your assets in ways that are going to build your wealth and hopefully not be wasted like an investment that goes bad and causes sometimes financial ruin. So what's the coping strategy for this? Assembling a collection of supportive professionals to delegate to is key, so you don't have to take it all on yourself. There isn't time in our life to become an expert at taxes and law and philanthropy and financial planning and even household administration equally. So we have to humble ourselves to defer to the trusted credentials of others whom we've somehow vetted to be trustworthy. We've gotten good word of mouth, or we've done online research and the reviews. We look at books by credible and reliable authors, because it would be arrogant to assume that we can do everything about everything without help, or to do it better than those who have really put in the work and put in the time to become experts. Number 9 can be pressure for a wealth culture learning curve. Especially if your wealth is sudden, this can cause a certain kind of disorientation culturally from being thrust into a new socioeconomic class. Speaking of 60s TV, the Beverly Hillbillies was a really popular sitcom during the 60s that was rerun ever since, really. But it was about a little Appalachian farmer, I guess he was, who strikes oil in the middle of nowhere and becomes very wealthy very quickly and moves his hillbilly family to Beverly Hills in a big mansion. And it was kind of that fish out of water genre that a lot of comedy comes from to great effect. And it ran for a number of seasons because there was just so much material to get for comedy out of the fish out of water thing. So real life is not a comedic sitcom, but there is that kind of learning curve where if we didn't grow up wealthy and yet somehow it becomes thrust upon us, as the saying goes, we do have to have an adaptive coping for that so that it doesn't kind of go to our head. We've heard about people who've won the lottery and then they've kind of just gone crazy, and it becomes a bad thing rather than a good thing for them to have had the winning lottery ticket. So the coping strategy is to always have emotional support for any life transition that you go through, whether it's moving into an older age or somehow relocating. I have another episode about when gay men relocate for a job or for a partner or whatever reason. Changing jobs is a change in culture and to some degree identity. Changing partners, changing friends, some kind of medical condition that we have to cope with. Certainly in my work in history, an HIV diagnosis and what that means as a cultural learning curve. Changes in your appearance over time, or of course your socioeconomic status. So we have to have emotional support to make smooth and kind of digestible transitions so that we feel empowered in life to face the changes that come along, and not just feel like we're trailing behind or being dragged by life events, but like outer circumstances are controlling us like, the tail is wagging the dog kind of thing. We need to invoke critical thinking at every phase of life to decide what we want to keep that serves us, what we want to modify given the current circumstances that require some kind of change or adjustment, and what we want to discontinue, the things that no longer work for us or the circumstances that no longer work for us, even, in our time and history and culture as part of the big picture. Number 10 can be the fear of being swindled when you're wealthy. Again, that goes back to the fear of loss thing. But wealthy people can have a fear of being swindled or targeted or undermined or betrayed in business or by strangers. Things like identity theft or home robbery. And the more visible you are as a wealthy person, even accidentally, this can create a magnet for exploitation for this kind of usually nonviolent white-collar crime. So what's the coping strategy for that? Part of self-care that goes, beyond obvious things like medical care and recreation is setting up an emotional and financial and physical safety for us. It's getting to know people such as, firefighters or cops or lawyers or insurance professionals and accountants that we can use to help educate ourselves about common schemes that we might be vulnerable to, whether in wealth or perhaps in old age. Seniors are especially vulnerable to crooks who prey on seniors if they have problems in judgment in older age, maybe from a dementia. And we have to have skills to research those we collaborate with. We can use online references or do background checks, and we have to learn how to engage a proper vigilance to protect our identity, especially online, or our online data, or our personal health information, or our banking information, things like passwords, or any material or information that could be used against us by professional criminals who deal in getting ill-gotten gains by way of illegally obtained personal information. So it doesn't happen, all the time, but most people who are wealthy can probably point to some kind of a situation where they've been swindled. It's happened to me a couple of times. I'm not all that wealthy, but I've certainly been swindled a couple of times and been very resentful of the mean-spiritedness behind it, the selfishness and the narcissism of it behind it too. Number 11 is very similar. It's a fear of being targeted for violent crime. Things like street muggings or burglary or even home invasion. And I think we cope by learning from police or other types of security sources, online information, neighborhood watch groups, crime statistics, local crime blotter reports, maybe a security consultant, where or when we might be vulnerable to common street crimes and how to kind of take some precautions to protect ourselves. A security professional who maybe is a security firm consultant might be able to consult with us about our home security for things like locks or alarms or home safes or even a home safe room. It's learning to be aware of your surroundings and how to reduce risk of being targeted by muggers, not flashing jewelry or not appearing inebriated or incapacitated in public, walking with a sense of purpose, day or night, learning to use some kind of self-defense, but not too much self-defense, if someone's using a gun, because that can scare the perpetrator and make him or her shoot. So we have to be scanning our surroundings, especially at night, and trying to be aware where we live of where the trouble spots are. I live in West Hollywood, fairly gay neighborhood, and there's several areas that are hot spots where some of them I might just avoid altogether, and others I might, take an Uber or a Lyft or something rather than walk there if people have been mugged in that vicinity. So number 12 is kind of an existential angst in being wealthy. Wealth can be existentially, certainly, an enjoyable experience, that many people from all walks of life the world over aspire to. And people achieve on a spectrum from very high levels of wealth to lower levels, not very much. But existentially, financial and material wealth is only one component of our overall quality of life. If it were the only one, then rich people would always be ecstatic and poor people would always be miserable. And that's just not true. People of all socioeconomic statuses and experiences in life have the full range of subjective human emotions. And research shows that these can be in remarkably similar proportions. So in modern parlance, successful, that word is often used as a euphemism for just plain rich. And this kind of terminology is kind of problematic because it assumes that to be successful in life, one must be wealthy. And if one is not wealthy, or, by contrast, we are not successful. But what this leaves out is non-material wealth, which can be many things. Having strong family and friend community interpersonal relationships is a form of wealth. Having an appreciation for nature is a form of wealth. Being attuned to what we see around us in plants and flowers and animals and mountains and all that stuff. Having an ideal work-life balance is a prosperity in your personal time. Having an abundant amount of joy in your life is a form of wealth. Louise Hay talks about this in her lecture on prosperity. Just look up Louise Hay and prosperity on YouTube. It's a very good lecture about this stuff. Knowing a lot about things that give us pleasure, such as enjoying the arts or recreational sports or history, it's one of my favorites, or knowing a lot of songs in our head and music can be a form of prosperity and wealth. Having abundant health and not being particularly encumbered by the pain of illness or an ailment or a disability is certainly a form of wealth. Some people would say that's the ultimate wealth. No amount of money can force abundant health, as we've seen from very famous people who have sadly died of diseases or accidents. So what's the coping strategy for this, for the existential angst? I think it's about deliberately self-reflecting on the domains of life that help you define what wealth is, or success, or prosperity. Evaluate if your life is lopsided in one area or the other of the material versus the non-material abundance. Sometimes we do need to focus on wealth, especially for our long-term security and being responsible for ourselves to live as independently as possible in a civilized society for a long time. We have to take care of ourselves. That's just a practical reality of being an adult, all the way through seniorhood. Other times we can be quite financially secure, but we need to focus our attention and cultivate non-material resources, such as having more time and involvement for our partner or spouse, or for sex, or for community and civic involvement, or for time with our friends, or enjoying our pets, or enjoying nature, or providing just rest and relaxation for ourselves. Even if all of those do require a certain minimum amount of money to live on. We can't go to lunch with a friend if we can't pay for lunch. We can't have a pet if we can't somehow pay for their care. Things like that. Number 13 is a challenge in wealth in toxic competition. I'm going to be writing a little bit more about this at another time fairly soon. But in toxic competition, we can have intellectual property theft or living in a state of constant one-upsmanship. Keeping up with the Joneses and feeling this pressure that we have to keep achieving and keep accumulating in order to somehow maintain our sense of self. So what's the coping strategy for toxic competition? It's to reassure ourselves that our only race is with ourselves, that despite social pressures or the illusion of life as a competitive game, our only competition really is with ourselves. While we can enjoy being part of a community, it's because we like sharing something in common, like the LGBT community. But it's not an excuse to find ways to feel bad about ourselves because someone else has or does something that we feel we need to match. We don't need to play that game of keeping up with the Joneses. We can live by our own value rules. And that kind of phenomenon, I think, puts citizen against citizen in some type of materialistic, capitalistic game that we never volunteered to play. We don't need to play that if we don't want to. We can begin and end with our own sense of what's right for us. Number 14, as a challenge of wealth, is a sense of mistrust. People who are wealthy, who I've worked with, have very often expressed a certain anxiety about their interpersonal context of people and worrying about whether the people in their lives, especially the people who assert being in our lives, are seeking us out because they like us for us at whatever socioeconomic status we are, or if they simply are drawn to us for our proximity to the things that they want, like money or status or power, or, where I live in LA, access to Hollywood, fame and fortune. There's a classic play and later a classic movie called The Heiress, starred Montgomery Clift and Olivia de Havilland. And, Montgomery Clift was a famous gay actor who was very tortured by his gay identity, but he was absolutely beautiful. And the Heiress story explores whether a handsome young suitor likes a wealthy girl for who she is or for her money, while her cruel father casts doubt on his intentions by insulting his daughter's appearance. And it's a bit of a dilemma play with kind of an enigmatic ending. And not unlike the play Doubt, more recently by John Packer Stanley. I think it's being revived on Broadway now with Tyne Daly. And these plays almost torture their audience with us trying to figure out the real truth of the situation. But that's something I've worked with gay men a lot on, either because they're in the public eye or because they're wealthy or both, that there's always a little bit of doubt about whether people like them for them or for what they have or what they represent and live in. So what's the coping strategy for this? There's a quote that says, "When people show us who they are, believe them." Time is our friend here. If people in our lives are just fair weather friends who seek to just, gimme, that will become apparent reasonably early in our tenure knowing them. And privately, you can sort of test people by not always picking up the dinner tab or denying requests for things, for favors, and see if they still take your calls or return your text messages. Grifters and parasites, can be abundant, but they're not especially bright, so they're easy to spot. Then you cull your social life or even your professional network of these people, and then you're left with maybe a smaller group, but a small group of good faith friends and colleagues that then you don't mind doing favors for later, because it's about more than just what you have. It's about the interpersonal relationship that you share. So those are the challenges. Let's talk about what kind of interpersonal relationships can support you in wealth. Gay men with wealth, to whatever varying degree, whether now or in the future, can thrive by utilizing a robust social support network. That's the phrase that we clinical social workers use, is how much does the client, meaning you, have a social support network? Well, us too, really. But in general, wealthy people can feel isolated. I hear that a whole lot, either because they kind of speak a language that few others do, or sometimes there's this feeling that they're lonely at the top, or they ruminate in isolation because of a fear of not knowing whom they can trust. The famous examples of that, like, Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire, or Elvis Presley, who was kind of paranoid and reclusive as drugs took a hold of him towards the end of his life. Michael Jackson, certainly, almost paranoid about his privacy. So to avoid this, it's important to defend against isolation by utilizing certain adaptive coping strategies. So we need to identify and culture and nurture and sustain all of the members of our social support system, both professionals and non-professionals. I see our social support system as like two concentric rings around us. There's a ring around us that might be family or friends or roommates or partners or, the inner circle, literally the inner circle. And then there's kind of the outer circle of our professional supports. So people like me as a therapist and coach would be in that outer circle of people that you rely on for support, that you've come to trust because of their experience or credentials. I sometimes joke with everybody, I have one job and what I do for a living, it's like keep my mouth shut. So, especially in LA where, I don't know, I could probably have a side hustle selling secrets to TMZ, but that would be, wildly illegal and unethical, and just don't do it. But, your doctor could also be a part of that outer professional circle, your financial planner, your tax accountant, anybody that is a professional relationship, but also has this interpersonal, almost like an interpersonal intimacy, and maybe even a certain kind of affection, but in the context of a professional relationship. And that's what therapy can be a lot. It's a professional relationship, but it still has, in some ways, a certain emotional intimacy. Even though it's not a sexual intimacy, it's an interpersonal intimacy based on a pretty profound trust, which is why these relationships can be valuable. It's the same thing with a financial planner who understands your anxiety about financial risks and your need to have long-term security. So let's look at who the members of your social support system can be. Number one, of course, I think is your spouse or your partner. It's important for gay male couples to avoid the animal kingdom tendency for two males of any species, including in a gay male relationship, to indulge in competition between each other. Even gay men are not completely immune to the societal effects of toxic masculinity that seduces us into toxic competition, like we're the last men standing, or the toxic masculine trait of accumulating insatiably, in a very patriarchal way. Our spouse or our partner needs to feel like our home and hearth, our sanctuary, our refuge. And we need to trust them with specific situations. With a spouse or a partner, we're naming numbers. Who else but to a spouse or partner usually knows our exact annual income or salary? When we have to show a brave face to the world, our spouse or partner is perhaps the one person, or a few people if you live in a gay male polycule, which I work with some frequency, and they share an even more complex financial dynamic among three or more partners. And this is the person that is the go-to, at our most vulnerable, private, and intimate moments in life. And so we have to cultivate relationships with partners or spouses that are worthy of this kind of intimate trust. Number two would be our family, our father, our mother, our stepfather, or uncles and aunts, or cousins, or siblings. A lot of times it's siblings, can also be in the know in our most private support system. Having access to and even responsibility for our parents' finances, like if they get to be elderly, might be a task that they age into seniorhood, and we need to take over their financial responsibilities if they're no longer able to, ethically and fairly. I do this for my elderly mom. Our family has a key part of our social support system, and it's kind of inherently time limited, like visiting on major holidays or vacations. That's all we see of our family. Our family sometimes includes a collective family estate, and that can give us a sense of small group identity and a sense of belonging of who we are, especially if we're not estranged because of rejection from them for being gay, as certainly happens. Television historically has done a great job of dramatizing the idea of the family support system, particularly in wealth, to kind of melodramatic extents, like the the TV show Dallas, a nighttime soap about a wealthy oil family, or Dynasty, another wealthy oil family, or shows like Succession or Empire, where wealth is a component of the family culture. Number 3 would be our peers. Our peers in the same economic class can sometimes support us in that been there, done that kind of way. We might confide in peers and ask them for advice on things that only people in similar circumstances can understand. And this can be a very high or even a very low socioeconomic status about, how they've coped with certain common challenges that come with whatever social class we're a member of. But confiding or relying on our peers and showing our vulnerability has to be done carefully to balance having a sense of support and intimacy while also preserving our sense of privacy. Number 4, as a resource, would be books from reliable authors. Now, those aren't interpersonal relationships because we're not communicating back and forth with the author usually. But books and possibly websites or webinars, are not interpersonal support, but they can still function as a supportive resource if we're getting sometimes very specific information that we need from very specifically credentialed and accredited experts. In all the materials we read, we have to apply critical thinking to see if the material or advice pertains to us, particularly as gay men, and not just advice from financial books to straight people, and whether or not it needs some kind of translation, and is it still timely and relevant to today's social and economic climate. I don't recommend Dave Ramsey, the financial guru and the author of many books, because he is very specifically anti-gay, and in personal values, I do not believe in supporting anti-gay figures or anti-LGBT figures of any kind commercially. Whereas somebody like Susie Orman writes really good financial guidance books, and she's a member of the LGBT community as an out lesbian. Jane Bryant Quinn is a straight woman, and her financial planning books are really my favorites because they have a little less bravura than Susie Orman, but they're just super practical advice, maybe without all the bells and whistles. Number 5 is, as I mentioned earlier, having a financial planner or an accountant. And there's a certain intimacy in this professional relationship because our financial planner knows the real numbers, that ordinarily would be kept private from just about everyone else, except maybe our partner or spouse. And the process of choosing and trusting and maintaining the financial planner relationship is critical, and trusting their advice when there are economic or stock market ups and downs and at different times in our lifespan that need different perspectives, such as approaching, versus being in retirement. That's why I think sometimes we need to aim for a financial planner who's younger than us so that they can be with us for a nice long time. We also have to find a way to balance trusting their credentials and expertise and advice with objectively evaluating their professional performance, especially against other financial professionals who might serve us better and get us better long-term financial security. We have to know when to hold steady and when to jump ship in an investment, for example, and that requires financial advice, sometimes even outside of our financial planner, which can be hard to get. But sometimes having a fee-only, not commission, but fee-only second opinion review of our financial situation from an equally qualified financial planner can help identify the trouble spots in our strategy and maybe give us some additional peace of mind that we're in good hands in the first place. And of course, number 6, as a resource, here it comes, is having a therapist or a coach, right? Last but not least. Because having a therapist or a coach in your support system can also help to facilitate an open processing of any of your anxieties and to help clarify your life priorities and an agenda, to process any guilt you have about your situation, to process family of origin issues or conflicts, or social life issues or conflicts, to help you process imposter syndrome, or to learn assertive communication techniques that can be applied to many different situations, but to cope with the anxiety of loss or threat, or to help you schedule self-care and rewarding experiences in non-material ways to process mortality and existential dilemmas in life, and also sometimes in coaching to provide accountability, in coaching you on your goals in all of these areas about how you can define current and future success, and coach you on what changes you need to make so that you're on more solid ground and that you just kind of have a better, more confident time of it, increasing your peace of mind. So, there's certainly lots of resources out there that can support you, but I'd certainly be happy to serve as your resource for therapy if you're a resident of the state of California, where I'm licensed, or coaching, which could be worldwide in the United States or just anywhere. I work with guys in a lot of different time zones. And I can explain some more very important legal and ethical differences between therapy and coaching when we talk. There's a lot of rules that go into that. We can discuss that. So for more information on how I might help you in your specific situation, please feel free to get in touch. You can call or text 310-339-5778. That's 310-339-5778. Or email ken@gaytherapyla.com. Gaytherapyla.com is my website. Or also you can email me in coaching ways, ken@gaycoachingla.com. So gaycoachingla.com is kind of the sister website for my coaching services, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. If you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting it. There is a link in my Instagram link tree and on my website on gaytherapyla.com, and also just spreading the word about the show. If you're enjoying the show, spread the word to other gay men who might enjoy being listeners, and that might put about 50 cents in my pocket worth of advertising. So that would help support the production of the show. So I hope you found this helpful, and thanks. I'll see you next time.